Thank you to everyone for joining us again today. Oregon's economy continues to recover and change rapidly. The National Bureau of Economic Research determines the official start and end dates of recessions. On Monday, they announced that the pandemic recession began and ended in just 2 months, with an official end date of April 2020. And while we know the recession is technically over, recovery is far from complete. At this point, it's happening relatively quickly, though. We're now 16 months past the initial downturn, and Oregon has regained nearly 2 out of 3 jobs that were lost in the spring of 2020. Just in the first 6 months of this year, Oregon employers added about as many jobs as they did during the 22 months leading up to the pandemic. For reference, 16 months into the Great Recession, we hadn't recovered at all. The business closures and the job losses were still mounting. So the speed and the shape of this economic recovery looks incredibly different and is happening much faster than what we've seen in the past. And while the economy is on the upswing, we know many businesses are still having trouble hiring so they can fully recover themselves. And that difficulty is made up of 2 general parts. The first is widespread hiring, and the second is a relatively small available supply of workers. Both Oregon and the US have recently seen record levels of job openings. In Oregon, private employers reported 98,000 job vacancies in the spring of 2021. That's nearly 50% higher than we've seen at any time in the 8-year history of Oregon's job vacancy survey. And it's happening throughout all areas of the economy and in more than 240 different occupations. There are many factors that are fueling this increased hiring. There is a lot of pent-up demand for goods and services and a lot of pent-up demand to get out, and a lot of savings as well. According to Oregon's Office of Economic Analysis, Oregon has $2.5 trillion in excess savings. And so that translates to more goods, more services, and more travel that consumers want as it becomes possible. And that in turn creates more demand to hire the workers to make those goods and provide the services that consumers want. At the same time, there's also more worker movement that's increasing businesses' hiring needs. Recently, the number of people who quit their jobs hit its highest level nationwide. And when someone quits a job, that often creates a vacancy to replace them. And retirements are likely on the upswing again, too. Between 2016 and 2019, the number of people who said they weren't in Oregon's labor force due to retirement rose by about 21%. After taking a pause in 2020, we expect those retirements, largely baby boomer retirements, are on the upswing again. And that's, when someone retires, that's also someone else who's creating a job vacancy in most cases to replace them. And it's another worker that's not going to be looking for another job or available to take one. And that's the bridge to the other side of the hiring difficulty. And that's a relatively low supply of available workers. In June, Oregon's unemployment rate was 5.6%. That's relatively low by historical standards. And we know that there are also people who are still not able to participate in this recovery or participate in that labor force. In the spring of 2021, there were about 32,500 Oregonians who said a COVID-related issue kept them from looking for work. Now, that could be their own underlying health conditions. It could be those parents who are in a bind with a lack of childcare or until fully in-person school resumes in the fall. And while the trend has improved from 66,000 last fall, it's still a large number of Oregonians who have barriers keeping them out of work. Now, all of this taken together, higher pent-up demand, greater, I lost my thought for a second, sorry. The pent-up demand, so all the things taken together, rapid recovery, pent-up demand for goods and services, a relatively low unemployment rate, and those factors that are either holding or keeping people out of the labor force, all of that is coming together and creating these ongoing labor shortages. And that adds up to a really challenging hiring environment for employers. In the spring of 2020, 7 out of 10 job vacancies were identified as hard to fill by Oregon businesses. We're also watching trends related to unemployment benefits. From in the first half of this year, the number of people who are receiving any kind of benefits from the employment department has decreased significantly. And our return to work efforts are helping those who are unemployed get matched up to the businesses who need to hire for the many available jobs in Oregon. With that, I will turn to our acting director, David Gerstenfeld, and thank you.
Thank you for that, Gail, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I do have some good news to share in our return to work efforts that we're doing to help people get back to work and help businesses fill those vacant positions that they're hiring for. This week, we're piloting the physical reopening of several WorkSource Oregon locations with our partners, including centers in Astoria, Coos Bay, Curry, Lane, Klamath Falls, Ontario, and Roseburg. We're continuing to offer online and phone appointments, but are now adding in-person appointments in those locations as well. And those are to specifically help people register in iMatch Skills or to help them find new jobs or new careers. Some other good news is that most of the people whose deadline to register in iMatch Skills has passed have already completed that registration process. Fewer than 5,200 people, down from the over 12,000 people that were at risk last week, who claimed benefits last week, missed their deadline to register in iMatch Skills and haven't done that registration yet, causing their benefits to stop. People in that situation should register right away to receive their benefits. There's about another 14,300 people who have recently claimed benefits, and their deadline for registering is July 25th, and they haven't yet done that. So there's still some time for them, and we're certainly watching that closely. People who don't register by their deadline will have their benefits pause. If they register in iMatch Skills, they then receive all benefits retroactively that they were eligible for. Since the beginning of June, more than 63,500 customers have completed their iMatch Skills profile. In terms of the benefits that we're providing, we've shared in the past that federal law requires that we review all claims on a quarterly basis. We know that that any delay in receiving benefits is a real hardship for people, and we're working as quickly as possible to complete these quarterly claim reviews. We previously shared that while we would do everything we could to resolve them as quickly as possible, it might take up to 5 weeks into this calendar quarter for some claims to be addressed. We're pleased to report that we've completed 79% of those reviews and are on track to complete them all by the end of this month. We also have some good news related to our WorkShare program. WorkShare is a critically important program that helps employers and employees during difficult times. Employee hours are reduced, and employees can receive unemployment insurance benefits to supplement their lost earnings. WorkShare helps cushion the financial hit that workers face, and importantly, it helps employers keep talented workers who can return to full-time work as soon as business rebounds. Before the pandemic, there were restrictions on how certain hours that were worked were defined, and this permanent rule now allows certain paid leave hours, such as for jury duty, bereavement, if the employee is sick or caring for a sick family member, or if it's in response to a declared emergency, to count as hours worked during the week. This makes permanent some temporary changes that we made during the pandemic, and it expands how WorkShare can be used. We made these changes based on feedback that we heard from employers who used WorkShare during the pandemic to help them and their employees through very difficult times. We want to remind people that have benefit overpayments, they may be eligible for a waiver, which would mean they wouldn't have to repay those overpaid benefits. To have the overpayment waived, somebody does have to complete the online overpayment waiver form, and that can be found in the quick links section at unemployment.oregon.gov. Waivers are available for many types of overpayments. They do not apply to benefits that were received because someone committed fraud. And unfortunately, there are ongoing fraud efforts, and we want to make the public aware of a new scam that we've seen circulating in Oregon. Some people reported receiving an email that purports to be from the Employment Development Department, or EDD, telling them to contact them today or their benefits would stop. This appears to be an attempt to hijack a person's claim. We're reminding people to avoid emails that do not end in a .gov, and to remember that in Oregon, we're called the Oregon Employment Department. We know that there are wildfires being battled throughout the state, and that unfortunately some Oregonians are facing enormous hardships. That can include being evacuated, and some workers may be out of work because businesses may temporarily close. The quick links section at unemployment.oregon.gov has a link to frequently asked questions with information specific to the wildfires. I also have an update on our very aggressive July 1st benchmarks of answering 80% of calls within 15 minutes and responding to 90% of contact us inquiries within 7 days. Last week, we answered 42% of calls within 15 minutes. Importantly, we answered over 22,000 benefits-related calls last week. That's an increase of 10,000 over the number of calls answered in the same time last year. And looking at a monthly snapshot between mid-May to mid-June and comparing that to mid-June to mid-July, the average time for us to resolve a Contact Us ticket has gone down from 14 days to 13 days, and we remain focused on shortening that even more as quickly as we can. A major customer service challenge we're facing is that federal law requires each claim to be individually reviewed. And as I mentioned, claims have to be reviewed each calendar quarter, and that's underway now. Also, each week of benefits claimed may have an issue that requires further manual review. We've been consistently increasing our unemployment division workforce. It's quadrupled. We continue to hire and train more people and make other improvements so we can serve people more quickly. The work that we do is complex, and more so with the many federal benefit programs and particular circumstances facing people during the pandemic. It takes time, mentoring, and experience for an employee to be able to quickly resolve claim issues, and the pandemic has made this challenging for us all. We know how important customer service is, and it is a primary goal of our agency. Providing excellent, timely customer service is a core part of our modernization project. We've learned a lot about the needs and ways to provide customer service during the pandemic. Our modernization effort is actively underway and will improve the customer service we provide. And that will take some time, so we continue to create workarounds and take other steps that we can with our current system constraints, even as we pursue the more comprehensive help that we know the modernization effort will provide. Since March of 2020, the Employment Department has paid $10.2 billion in benefits to more than 605,000 people, and that represents 15.3 million weeks of benefits. We're continuing to hire and train people to meet the needs of serving the public, whether that's helping people get benefits, helping them get job services, or any of the other assistance that we provide. And we know that we're fast approaching the date when several of the federal benefit programs, pandemic unemployment assistance, pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, mixed earner unemployment compensation, and the federal pandemic unemployment compensation will end. That's on Saturday, September 4th. We want to make sure people looking for work receive the services they need so they can be back at work before those important safety net programs end. And I'd really like to thank our employees who continue to operate at a breakneck pace. Some have had to shift focus from unemployment insurance benefits to building expertise to help employers and job seekers. It's not easy to keep up that pace for 16 months and during a time of tremendous and ongoing change, but they're doing an outstanding job, are greatly valued, and are so committed to helping their fellow Oregonians. With that, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Now we are opening the phone lines to members of the media to ask questions. We will call on you in the order you RSVP'd. Please make sure to state who you are directing your question to. And a reminder, if you're joining us by phone, be sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself. If you don't get your question answered, please email oed_communications@oregon.gov. And the first question is from Peter Wong from Pamplin Media. Go ahead, Peter.
All right. My first question's for David. Other than some of the folks who should register for iMatch skills haven't done so, have have there been any other issues involved in getting people back to work? Uh, uh,
Well, there's a lot of parts to that. A key part of what we do is looking at what that individual needs. So the physical reopening of the WorkSource Oregon centers with a lot of our employees and employees of some of our partners is key to helping people. For some people, they're really self-sufficient. They know exactly what's needed. And it's pretty easy for them to find a job through IMAT skills. And there's not a huge effort on our part to help them find that next new job, particularly in such a competitive job market. For other people, they're facing real barriers, and Gail alluded to some of them. It could be their own medical condition, it could be childcare, it could be that they need some additional training to be competitive for a job or for the type of career that they want. So there's a lot of individualized work that really is looking at each person and what barriers they may face. And that's the work that is underway now that we're excited to be doing. There's a lot of pieces of that, including the physical reopening of offices, which is making it easier for some people to access us who didn't feel as comfortable doing that, either over the telephone or using technology resources. So I'm hoping that answers the question that you were getting at. It's certainly a big part of what we're doing. What the issues are really depends on the individual, maybe where they are in the state and what type of work they're looking for.
Okay, as a quick follow-up to that, do you have any timetable or any idea on when you might reopen, like, say, metro area WorkSource offices for this same purpose?
We're hoping to do that in the near future. I mentioned that we're opening those several offices today. That's as a pilot project because we want to do this carefully. We know that there's a lot of pent-up demand for people that are wanting assistance. So we wanted to make sure that we are as well prepared as possible. So we're rolling this out with a pilot first to make sure that it goes smoothly and that we can do what we've been practicing for the past year and a half of quickly making any needed adjustments. But we hope to be announcing soon the opening of the WorkSource offices with our partners throughout the state.
Okay. I don't have anything for Gail, although obviously the traditional definition of a recession has been turned on its head with this recession, because normally, isn't it normally 2 calendar quarters where of declines that defines a recession? We now have a 2-month recession.
Yes, technically a 2-month period would not qualify by the NBER standards as a recession period. It usually would last for several months. And they said that just given the scale of the impacts to the economy and to people, that this was definitely worth an exception to that rule.
Okay, thanks.
Next up is Mike Rogoway with the Oregonian.
Good afternoon. I think this question is for David, but Gail may have some insight too. I'm curious what you expect in terms of the effect of the work search requirement kicking in at the end of this month and how that will affect the number of people receiving benefits. Is there anything from what's happened in other states, for example, who might have done this already that we can learn from as far as what to expect, or past history with the employment department as far as whether or not people are easily able to comply with that requirement?
Sure, I can give it some answers, and certainly if Gail has additional insights, welcome her to add to that. It's a little hard to look at history to predict because we haven't ever stopped the work search requirements like we did. One of the many things that was novel during the pandemic, but we do know during normal times that most people meet that work search requirement, and it's not too onerous for them to do that. If you have 100,000 people who are required to do that, some of them will face challenges and we try to work with them. But by and large, the majority of people who are filing for benefits in normal times do meet that work search requirement. When we look at other states, some of what we're seeing, and it's pretty anecdotal, particularly because there are so many different variables moving at the same time. We're not anticipating that by itself, the work search requirement is going to significantly shift the number of people receiving benefits. Again, there may be some people that aren't meeting that requirement that we tell them we think they're not eligible and give them a chance to challenge that decision. But most of what we're seeing is that decline that Gail mentioned of a lot of people no longer receiving benefits or claiming benefits, largely because the people that do feel comfortable going back to work and are able to find jobs. So we anticipate an ongoing decrease in the number of people receiving benefits or seeking benefits, but I think most of that's going to be related just to the really strong job market and not to the work search requirements. The only other thing I would add is kind of a caveat that we're watching closely along with everyone, I think, the COVID-19 variants and what impact that may have on how many people are able or feel safe returning to the workplace, so that the pandemic still remains kind of a hard to nail down variable as we're making these projections.
To add to David's points, there are two pieces of preliminary research that I've seen related to the states that ended the pandemic-related unemployment programs early. And so there's initial research out of the University of Massachusetts Amherst that looked at 25 states that ended those programs prematurely. And in the first few weeks afterwards, they did not see an increase in their employment to population ratio, so the share of the population that has a job. And then the other thing came from Indeed, which is a job board, and their lead economist had done some work to see how the ending of the programs translated to more intensive work search activity, and there were no significant findings for that either. So it doesn't seem that, at least in terms of preemptively ending those programs, that it's turned out to be a cure-all in terms of people coming back into jobs. And I think that contributes to the notion that there really are many factors that are contributing to what's happening at the household level right now.
Good, thanks to you both. That's very helpful. One very quick follow-up. David, you mentioned the variants. Has there been any talk of postponing that work search requirement, given the variants?
We're watching that, but at this point, we're not intending to do that. It's certainly something that if it becomes necessary, we're trying to balance both the impact on businesses and workers and protecting the integrity of the system. The work search requirement is something that also helps our employees when they have those individualized discussions with people to sometimes coach people about other things that they might be able to do to find a job or to find a new career better. So we view it not just as something that the law does generally require people to do, but also it's a tool for us to really provide assistance to job seekers to help them be as effective as possible. So if that changes, we'll certainly be letting you know and communicating that very broadly to anyone involved with the unemployment system.
Understood. Very helpful. Thanks much to you both.
Next up is Kate Davidson with OPB.
Hi. Do you have a sense, and I know that these numbers will change a lot by September 4th, but have a sense of the number of people currently receiving PUA benefits, and then, all of the other programs that you mentioned, PEUC, FPUC, et cetera, that would be affected by the end of these emergency programs?
I don't have those figures in front of me. We are looking at that, and that's something that we can provide some follow-up on. I know that we're working to watch closely with all those different variables to have our best estimate. So I can't give you an answer now, but it's something that we can follow up with in the near future.
Okay. And for the workforce offices, can you remind me both when they closed, so when the last time they were open was, and as you return to in-person appointments there, will they be fully staffed for in-person appointments? I mean, I'm thinking about how many people can be served in person at each of these locations. Is it what it used to be, or is it a limited number?
So this is another situation, Kate, where there's a lot of variables. We have had most of our employees working remotely, and that's part of what we're looking at in this pilot project. Is again, we've never had a situation in Oregon, nor have other states that I know of, where those centers have been physically closed and there's this kind of pent-up demand. We also don't know how many people will want to come in because they prefer in-person services. and how many people will want to continue using the virtual services. So this pilot opening will really help us a lot. We're doing it by appointment to start with, to try to make it sure that we can manage that customer service aspect of helping people. At this point, we're part of the way into the first day of that pilot project, but our hope is that we do have enough people, we're ready to adapt quickly to, if needed, have some people that are currently remotely work in the office and to make other adjustments that we might need to. But it's just really hard to predict how many people will be able to come in and how many people will need to.
That makes total sense. And I understand it could change tomorrow. I mean, do you have a sense of today, sort of how many appointment slots are available at each of these places?
I know that we do. I personally don't have that information. I know that they're watching that really closely. So far, we have had people coming in for appointments, for in-person appointments. And the last report that I heard, which was earlier this morning, we weren't seeing long lines, and we were able to keep up pretty well, both with people calling and with people needing that in-person assistance. It's something that we're watching really, really closely because we don't want that to become a problem for people, and we want to try to manage expectations as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next is Bill Poehler with the Statesman Journal.
Yeah, hi. This question is for David specifically. So something I keep on hearing about from people is the automated messages, both in the mail form, like physical mail, and in email, that people are still getting these automated letters from your department, and a year into this, is there any way that what's behind that? Why do they still get these, even if they've been approved or been denied finally? Why do they still seem to get these a lot?
So I can give you some of the kind of environmental factors that probably contribute to it. And I think both of them are things I alluded to earlier. One is that unemployment is a weekly benefit system. So even if their claim is approved, if something comes up for a particular week that somebody has claimed, they might have a valid overall benefits claim, but they may not be eligible for benefits for a particular week, or there might be something that we're required to look into to determine if they're eligible. And that could be maybe somebody went back temporarily to work and quit a part-time job. Maybe they left the state for a period of time, either to have a job interview or to go on vacation. There's a number of things that we might have to look at. So that, I think, is one of the factors that addresses why even after a claim is originally addressed, these notices might continue to be received. Can also be due to that quarterly review that we're required to do. The other factor, and probably the bigger one, really relates to the modernization and that customer servicing that I mentioned. A lot of the notices that people receive are hard-coded into our COBOL mainframe system. And the notices automatically get issued as certain things happen with a claim, or as certain events kind of trigger a review of a claim. And in normal times, that works really well. This hasn't been normal times. And unfortunately, going in to make mainframe coding changes to alter those notices is very time consuming. It's very risky in that it has the potential to have unintended consequences in how claims are actually being paid. That's one of the big issues behind our modernization effort, is being able to improve how we communicate with people. So we still have some additional things that we've done to try to put information on our website to help people understand what some of those automatically generated notices mean. But those, I think, are probably the core underlying issues that cause some of those automated notices that people are receiving.
Right, but you can understand, and I totally get it with the programming part, but you can see why a lot of people, and throughout this whole thing, have been confused or whatever by getting these just, letter after letter after letter saying you're denied, you're denied, you're denied. Would it have been better early on to be able to go back into that system, or was it such a patchwork of stuff that has to be done that it wasn't a priority?
We certainly understand the impact, and it's not that we don't think it's important. It's tinkering with the same system that we had to make changes to actually get benefits paid to people. And we had to prioritize what we were going to work on. And we've been prioritizing getting benefits to people as quickly as possible. So in many cases, in most of those cases, we literally would have had to say, for instance, we're going to wait to implement the additional $300 per week in benefits while we go in to change some of those automatically generated notices. And as I mentioned, it is kind of a network of connected mainframe systems. So whenever we go in to make changes, there's a risk that in trying to just stop a notice or change the phrasing in a notice, that it might have some unintended consequence that could delay payments or cause overpayments or other issues with claims. And it takes a lot of very thorough testing to make sure that that doesn't happen. And continuing to now the other work that we need to do to get people benefits, to resolve their claims, and to meet the federally required reporting has really precluded us from being able to make all those improvements that we would like to. That lack of flexibility, as I said, is one of the major things that we want to address in our modernization effort that we're working on now.
All right, well, thanks so much, David, appreciate it.
Next up is Sophia Prince from Jefferson Public Radio. Sophia Prince, Jefferson Public Radio. Please hit *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, we will come back. Next up is Dick Hughes with the Hughesisms.
Thank you very much. David, I'd like to follow up on a couple of things, and I sort of have two related questions, so I'll ask them together. I want to make sure I understand about people returning to work. What I understand is that you're still assessing remote work and whether some people can or will continue working remotely, and whether some people return to traditional offices. Is that correct? And if and also, to what extent is the employment department having problems filling positions? In other words, the same thing that other employers are having. I hope those make sense.
Sure, they do. And certainly we, besides administering these programs, we are an employer, as you pointed out, and we're competing with all the other employers in the state to recruit workers. So it is a really challenging job market. It's great if you're a job seeker, you have lots of choices. When you're the employer, it's more difficult. And we are seeing those same types of issues that all employers in the state are. And you're right, we are having some employees who were working remotely during the pandemic come back to work. Our focus here really is on what we need to do to serve the public. We were able to make a lot of changes during the pandemic that let people work remotely who had never been able to do so before. There are some real benefits to that, including it provides more opportunities as we recruit and hire new people. As we're physically opening up some of the offices to provide in-person services, because we know some people need that in-person assistance, they may not have access to technology. To help those people, we need to have people physically in the office. So as we get a better sense of how many people we need in each office to meet that demand for in-person customer assistance, that's really driving how many people we need to be in those WorkSource offices in person, and how many people will be able to continue working remotely, whether on a full-time or kind of a hybrid basis. So we're looking at that throughout all the different types of work that we do. We do anticipate going forward into the future that we've learned a lot during this pandemic, and we will have more people that telework certainly in the future than we did before this experience. But we know that some of the people that have been working remotely will need to have in the office so that we can effectively serve the needs of the public. And we're kind of doing those pilots and easing into that to make sure that we're keeping our employees safe, giving them time to prepare, and working with them so we can meet the public's needs as smoothly as we can.
Thank you. Just to clarify one thing, is there any type of deadline or goal by which you hope to decide whether who's returning to the office and who isn't, or is this just one of those things that's, variable, as you have said.
I frankly think it will continue evolving for quite a while. The state as a whole has been looking at early September as a time when things will likely be open to the public. Because some of the work that we're doing, there's this incredible demand to help people get back to work and to help businesses find workers. We and our WorkSource Oregon partners felt we couldn't wait until September 1st. So we've worked with others to make sure that we can open up safely, and we're doing that earlier. But we know that it will continue to evolve, and we'll need to keep adjusting as we learn from this experience. It's a little gentler now, but we're still learning as we face novel circumstances that we haven't before, bringing people in, and the way that we do work is changing a lot. So I think for the employment department, we will have a pretty good sense as we get through this pilot of WorkSource office reopening, but it will probably be into the fall before things have stabilized a little bit into kind of a new normal situation.
Thank you for that helpful explanation.
Next up is Keaton Thomas with KATU.
Hi, David. Good to talk to you again. First question, similar, related to some of what other people have asked, but once things go away, some of the federal stuff expires in September, what is the department doing, or what can you do, or what are you considering to soften the blow for those folks who have been relying on the federal benefits for the past year or longer?
Sure, and some of those programs are extensions. So there are some people that we think might be eligible for some state programs. We have some specific programs to help people get retraining into new careers. So people that might be in that situation, we've been doing outreach to people to encourage them to look into that, to encourage people to look into the possibility of self-employment assistance if that's something that fits for them. So there are some specialized programs that might help soften the blow for some people that we directly administer. We know that for a lot of people, the whole point of those federal programs was to give benefits to people that normally aren't covered by existing programs. So unfortunately, that means when those programs go away, there's a lot of people that won't have that safety net there. A lot of what we're doing is this focus on getting people back to work. That's some of the urgency around us opening the WorkSource offices with our partners, because we want to make sure that we're helping people find jobs before those benefits end. Importantly, those services through our WorkSource Oregon offices with our partners continues even after those federal programs end. So the benefit payments may not be there for some people, and that will be a real hardship, but we and our partners remain committed to helping people find jobs, find training, find new career paths. So there's a lot of that work that we're doing now to try to avoid there being an impact to people, and we'll certainly be there to help soften that impact when the federal programs do end.
Another question related to the WorkSource requirements, not the same, but similar to what has already been asked. And that is, we hear anecdotally from some businesses who talk about getting, calling someone, inviting them in for an interview, for that person to say, we're not going to show up, or I'm just here to say that I'm looking for work in order for me to get benefits. What sort of, I don't know if it would be protocols or requirements are there for people to actually look for work rather than look for work simply because they have to? Does that make sense?
Sure. I think you're asking essentially what kind of enforcement is there? How do we know that people are really doing what the law requires, which is to try to find a job in order to get benefits? And we do a couple of things. We certainly tell people what that requirement is. In general, people need to report to us what they're doing, and we do some spot checks, some kind of random ones, and others based on things that might raise some flags for us to look into further. We, of course, frankly, cannot check on each person's individual work search each week, particularly when we have record numbers of people filing benefits. One of the things that we've done that we're encouraging employers to let us know if they do think that somebody is turning down an offer of work or really trying to game the system. Most people aren't doing that, but for when an employer thinks that that might be going on, we want to know so that we can look into it. So we do have a link on our website for employers to give us information about that so we can follow up. I know in my discussions with some employers and some employer groups, some of what we think is going on is because it is such a strong market for job seekers, the people that are looking for work, that are able to get back into the workforce, they may go out and apply for 5 jobs. And in a normal job market, they may over time get a couple of job interviews, get an offer and accept it. Because so many employers are hiring, now that same person might get 4 interviews offered to them very quickly, and maybe even several jobs offered to them very quickly. If that person schedules several interviews, goes to the first one, receives and accepts a job offer, if they don't tell those other employers are seeing someone that set up an interview and then just doesn't show up. So in some cases, if it really is people that are just kind of trying to game the system, we want to know about that. But we think in many of these circumstances, it's probably people that found another job. And it's just one of the symptoms of that really competitive job market where people looking for work have a lot of choices.
Thank you.
Next up is Tracy Berry with KKNU.
Good afternoon. I had a quick question for Gail. The retirements that are not necessarily resuming, but speeding up a little bit and increasing. Do you have a sense from your surveys of employers whether that's hitting certain sectors a little harder, whether it's government, education, health and medicine, or is it pretty consistently spread across all the sectors?
It is different from one sector to another, and I don't have that right at my fingertips at the moment, but we know that roughly 1 out of 4 workers in Oregon's labor force prior to the pandemic was age 55 or older. So if not at, moving closer to that hopeful retirement period, and that there are some industries that do have larger shares of workers that are older, and some areas of the state as well. The rural areas of the state tend to have higher shares of workers that are in that 55 or older category. There are some industries like utilities where there does tend to be an older workforce, and education is another area where I think that that's been a concern as well. And even in areas where it may not be as much of a concern, just the level of demand that they have, if they're even at that average, it makes it more difficult. And I'm thinking of healthcare in that instance as well. So I can follow up with more information afterwards, but yes, it does differ from one area of the state to the next, differs by sector and also by occupations. Truck drivers is a great example where we consistently see shortages for workers and where there is a larger share of that workforce that tends to be 55 or older.
Thanks. That would be useful to follow up. And then just a second question is about the vacancies. I'm down in Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, and of course there are hiring and help wanted signs everywhere. But I'm curious whether from region to region, are you seeing higher levels of vacancies in some areas just because of the workforce makeup? And is some of the reason there are those higher levels of vacancies just because of the skill set within the general workforce?
This is another one that I don't have immediately at my fingertips, but if you go to qualityinfo.org and then click on publications, there's a job vacancy box that has all of the information about job vacancies for each of the 9 workforce regions of the state. And we can also follow up separately with that. We've seen that the increased demand, it's across the board. It's across the board by area, and it's across the board by sector. And I know that at a statewide level, we've seen a record number of job vacancies in healthcare and social assistance, about 22,000 in the spring. Leisure and hospitality, so restaurants, bars, hotels, was almost at 20,000 in the spring. Other services is another one. And again, leisure and hospitality and other services, these are some of the sectors that were really hit the hardest in the first place, and where we really want to see that momentum picking up in order to get us back to full recovery.